Coming out of the last Board of Governors, there's been some talk, and ESPN did an article a few days ago on this. So let's go ahead and take a look at why I don't think this would be a good way to go. Uh, the idea is this: you add a 32nd team in Seattle. Why are you leaving the playoffs at 16 teams? That's not fair. Well, wait a second. Teams in the East have had 16 teams in their conference for years. 8 have made it, and I haven't heard any complaining now. Now that we're going to have 8 in the West, and 2 of them are expansion teams, we're magically going to need more teams in the playoffs. So here's how it would work currently. Calgary, St. Louis, or St. Louis. St. Louis is not going to get mentioned in this. Calgary, San Jose, and Anaheim are your top 3 seeds in the Pacific. Nashville, Colorado, and Winnipeg are the 3 seeds, top 3 in the Central. Tampa, Toronto, Buffalo in the Atlantic, and in the Metro it's Washington, Columbus, and the New York Islanders. That's right, the Islanders right now are 3rd in their division. Good on them. So what you have is you have these teams all automatically qualify. Now, these wild cards are deciding who's going to face off with your division rivals. And you can have one game play-in. So the Vegas, who currently qualify for the playoffs, would play against the Oilers. Dallas would play against Minnesota. In the East, Boston would play Detroit. Montreal would play Pittsburgh. Now, the argument is this. If you expand it and you have a one-game play-in, so these teams play each other one game, and the winner gets into the playoffs, it'll create more rivalries. It'll make it so that more teams are in it, and there's more drama to it, and it makes it so that there isn't any guarantees. Here's the problem I have with it. We're already in a system where sometimes it feels like too many teams make it. Look at the other leagues. The National Football League has 32 teams, 12 make the playoffs. 12. And even in the NFL, sometimes you get a mediocre team in there. Major League Baseball, 10, including the wild card matchup. So 8 are in the technical playoffs, and then you have the wild card with other teams, so it's 10 altogether. And that's out of 30. And you know what? You're going to have Major League Baseball fans who complain that 10 teams make it instead of 4. We all remember when it was 4. That was fantastic. That was some great baseball. Honestly, it really was. And playoffs didn't last very long either. Major League Soccer currently has 12 teams in the playoffs. I didn't find anything about them expanding their playoffs. They currently have 20 teams. They're going to go to 28. My guess is they go to 16 out of 28. The NBA has 30 teams in it, and 16 teams make the playoffs. So if you look at Major League sports in North America, 16 is the limit, and NHL's already at it. They go to 32 teams, the same as the NFL. They want to make it so 8 extra teams make the playoffs. And the thing that I find funny is that in the article I was reading, they say, well, if you don't want to have to play these if you don't have to play these one-in games, then you should just be top 6. And then he points out that last year there was virtually no discernible difference in record between Colorado and St. Louis, who would have faced off in a one-game wildcard game to decide who makes the playoffs. But then why bother having anybody eliminated at all? I'm not kidding. Back in the 80s, we had 16 out of 21 teams made the playoffs. Do you know how much tension there was down the stretch? Not a lot. There really wasn't. The teams that missed the playoffs were usually pretty abysmal. They were bad. Unless you're in the Patrick division, in which case there was regularly a good team that missed the playoffs. So people complain now about, oh, this team missed the playoffs and they should have, and they were 1 point ahead of a team that made it. Compared to the 80s, that's nothing. And it's going to happen. The NFL, you have teams that are 9-7 make the playoffs and teams that are 10-6 that miss. It's just, it's part and parcel of a playoff system. Major League Baseball, even when there was only 4 teams that qualified, it was division winners that won. You'd have division winners with lousy records that made the playoffs and teams with great records that missed. It's just part of sports. The obsession with doing the 1v8, I don't even have a problem with the NHL going back to 1v8. Then the problem becomes division winners get the top 2 seed, and then people complain about the fact that a division winner at number 2 has a worse record than the number 3 or number 4 team. There's always an argument. There's no perfect system, but if you do this and you make it a one-game play, and think about it, your team has finished 7th. You're playing against the team that finished 10th in the conference. There's a potential you're 3 points ahead of them. There's a potential you're 10 points ahead of them. And now you have to win 17 games to win the Stanley Cup. Nobody else does. None of these teams do. The scenario here, I don't like, because it takes a playoff position potentially away from a team that should be in there. We've never had a system like that in the NHL. Because this technically would be a one-game play-in to get to the playoffs. And what gets me is that apparently it's really popular, and most of the owners and GMs want to do it because it's going to bring in all this extra revenue. That's 4 gates. That's 4 games. And the revenue would only go to the top seeds because they get to host the home game. And Vegas, probably not desperately in need for money. Boston and Montreal, also not in desperate need for money. Dallas, you could argue that Dallas could use a few extra bucks when you look at how many empty seats there are, but I haven't heard anything about them relocating or complaints about them losing money. So I don't get the extra gate thing either. And I honestly question how many people want it. Because here's the thing. Here's the argument that's being presented. That Gary Bettman is against it and therefore it won't happen. It's not really a thing. Gary Bettman works for the owners. If the situation has changed so the owners now work for him, he's pulled the greatest coup in the history of sports. He's a commissioner. He's in charge, yes, but if 17 or 18 owners come forward and say, hey, Gary, we want 20 teams in the playoffs, you're going to get 20 teams in the playoffs. And here's what gets me. So in the article, and I'll link to the article in the description for this video, the article mentions that an Eastern governor came out and said, we're very much in support of this idea. This is a very popular idea. When asked, Gary Bettman said there's a couple of owners, there's a couple of GMs, maybe a couple of coaches. It is not an overly popular idea. The article still makes it out to be that Gary's probably lying and that it is a very popular idea. We're not in the boardroom. Because we're not in the boardroom, we don't know. We really don't. And to decide, well, because Bettman is somehow evil. And I've had people ask me, like, why does everybody hate Bettman? You need to do a video on everybody hates Bettman. Honestly, I think it's because he's the boss. More than anything else, and I know there's things he said. I know the NHL leaving Canada at one point where you're taking Winnipeg away and Quebec away. There were rumors of Edmonton leaving, of Ottawa potentially leaving at one point. Now you've got Calgary looking at a building situation, Ottawa looking at a building situation. It always looks like the NHL is not defending Canada, which is not entirely true with Bettman. But I don't think Bettman wields absolute power. So the idea that there's this tremendous hunger to add these wild card play-in games to the playoffs, I don't understand it. Because honestly, we already are looking at a situation where the NHL has finally got a playoff system that makes sure that only the top half of the league make the playoffs. Why reward a team who missed the playoffs? That's my answer to the article. Why are you rewarding a team that missed the playoffs? Why are we deciding that 16 teams in the East and 8 teams making it to the playoffs, which has been the way it's been for over half a decade, was okay, but now that Seattle's being added, it's not? That's ridiculous. And the idea that, well, we need to add, and again, because the East has been really, really strong, and the idea that, well, you need to reward the West now because there's going to be 8 teams in it, so you need to expand the playoffs, it doesn't make any sense. I personally, I love how exclusive playoffs feel in other leagues. I love the idea of a team with a winning record in the National Football League, a team being 10-6, missing the playoffs. The idea that the teams that make the playoffs are really, truly, I'm not going to say elite, but they're pretty darn good. The idea that the NHL, with 32 teams, and with Seattle being given a pretty solid roster, because they're going to have the same expansion rules as Vegas, the idea that you're going to take a league of 32 pretty good teams and decide, we could make the playoffs exclusive to the very top 16 out of 32 and make sure that half the league misses the playoffs. But we don't really want to disappoint that many, so we're going to make it so there's a play-in system for teams that miss the playoffs. It's sad. If we want to make it like it was in the 80s, there were 16 out of 21 that used to make the playoffs. There were 5 that missed the playoffs, so you add an extra 11 teams. We'd go, what, 24 teams in the playoffs? We can go to a system where the top 8 teams in the league qualify for round 2, and then the other 16 can have a round 1. We just add an extra round to the playoffs. We can award the cup in mid-July sometime. It's honestly, it's insanity to me. So there you go. That's my answer to the idea that this is getting any traction. Because again, a lot of it to me is kind of hearsay, and until until I hear owners publicly saying we would like to go to 20 teams in the playoffs. The first time I heard this was from, I believe it was Kevin Lowe when he was general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. And this was back, I believe, when the league expanded to 30, that he said, oh, we should have a play-in. And this system is what Kevin Lowe talked about when they went to 30 teams. Think about how long ago that was. So this looks like something new. There's people who've been commenting and messaging me and saying, oh, you should talk about this. It's not really anything new. And I don't see why owners and GMs would be jumping on this like this is a great idea. Because for the teams who bust their ass to get that 7th or 8th spot, the idea that, well, you should have been 6th then, is what it says in the article. You serious? You're serious. After what Colorado did last year, the run they went on, you want to potentially take that playoff spot from them. After the run that New Jersey went on down the stretch to hold off the Florida Panthers, you want to make it so they still have to play the Florida Panthers in a one-game play-in after they held Florida off. After Colorado won that game 82 and all that emotion of this is great, they're in the playoffs, St. Louis is out, what a great game. You want to take all the emotion out of that, so they're going to play each other anyways. So game 82 really wouldn't have meant anything because they're going to play each other anyways. You take the emotion right out of it. It just decides where that game is played. I don't buy it. 16 teams out of 32 should make the playoffs. Any expansion of the playoffs, I think, is just going to make the Stanley Cup, even if it's awarded a day later, I still think the Stanley Cup's awarded far too late. I think if the NHL's regular season started in mid-September or first day of fall, something like that, move it back a couple weeks so the Stanley Cup's awarded at the start of June, and you can bump up your entry draft to, the second week of June. And you've got all those weeks in between where you can get set for free agency. I miss that because I'm old enough to remember when that used to happen. All right, there you go. I'm done ranting for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. How many GMs and owners do you think realistically would be on board with this? Honest opinion. And I encourage you to read the article. It is from ESPN, so I'm aware there are people who don't like ESPN, but it's something I wanted to discuss, and I wanted to illustrate on the board right now how that would affect who potentially doesn't make the playoffs. And to me, that would stink. Just personally, I think the idea isn't one that works for me. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Prove me wrong if you want. Debate me on this, no problem. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. I will talk to you again soon.